Thanks so much for listening to the Catholic Family Podcast. I'm glad to be back here for another few episodes in what I hope to be a series. We're going to see if we can make it a series or a small mini series of shows talking about, again, how to raise a Catholic family. And I know we've done this already. I did it with my parents. We did a series of shows a couple months ago, which I think are very good. I highly recommend anyone to go back and give them another listen because I think they have very good advice. But I thought it would be a good idea to bring on another couple, another pair of parents who've raised 10 children from a whole different culture, a whole different background. Okay, of course, they're traditional Catholics, but they're coming from down under. They're down in Australia, so obviously they have different traditions. They have different ways of upbringing their children, but of course, all through the Catholic faith and trying to raise their kids as best they can to be saints, which of course is the goal that we are all trying to achieve, all of us parents. And so I'd love to welcome the Arthurs, Damian and Theresa. Thank you so much for joining.
G'day, Kev. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
And I guess that the best way to start is if you guys could give me a brief introduction of who you are and where you live, how many kids you have. You're a little bit of an introduction of the Arthurs.
Yep.
Okay, Damian's asked me to go first. Okay. Well, I'm born in America, but grew up mostly in Australia. Moved here when I was about 4. And we got married in the early 90s and have had 10 children who range in age from, I think our eldest is 28, 27 maybe. That's terrible. I think he's, how old's Matthew?
That's not terrible. This is the first I've heard that we've got 10.
Oh, okay. I think Matthew just turned 28 because he was born in 93. So, yeah, he just turned 28. And our youngest is 8. And we have 5 girls and 5 boys. The eldest is married with 2 children, 1 more on the way, to a good Catholic young lady. And the next eldest is a daughter who's in the convent in Brooksville in Florida that is associated with Most Holy Trinity Seminary. And then we have another daughter who's recently married and she is expecting their first child, and another one who just got engaged. But apart from that, the rest of them are still single. So over to you.
Over to me. Okay, so my, let's see. Well, I'm 52. We're both, I won't say how old you are. So I'm 52 years old, a fair income Aussie, born here in Australia, and I joined the army when I was about 17 years old. Did that for about 11 years and then got out into what we used to call the real world. And anyway, by the time I got out, we'd already been married for 4 or 5 years, something like that. And then I got into the corporate world and really there's not much more than that. We're now business owners, so we run our own show, which was probably getting out of the corporate world and into running our own business was the second best decision that I ever made.
And what do you guys do? Well, what's the business you have?
So we have a small manufacturing business. So we manufacture catering, stainless steel catering equipment. That's probably the easiest way to say it. So, stainless steel equipment that you might find in a restaurant in the kitchen, such as boiling water units, hot water urns, coffee percolators, food steamers, that sort of thing. And so, that keeps us pretty busy. In fact, we're a small business, but interestingly, only business of our kind in Australia that makes what we make, because all the others that were doing what we do, they're all, importing from China now. So that puts us in a pretty good position in terms of being able to support the local market, and also in relation to stock and ability to react when there's challenges. So the 2 things that keep us going really is we have good customer service and our product is a very, very good, high quality product. Not that I can lay claim to creating that product, because we did buy the business off another chap who started the business 23 years ago and did a fantastic job in getting it to where he got it before he retired and we took over. So
is this a free advertisement for the company?
Exactly. That's what we're here for. I don't know if you're going to ship to where I am in Bavaria or to America, but it's good to plug. It's good to plug the people who come on and give a little marketing, free marketing. And I guess I'd ask you, do you do a lot of that work with your children? Do your children help out, or is that more of just you, Damian, or Theresa, both of you?
No, look, there's a number of reasons why we went down this path. Too many reasons to explain on this show, but one of the reasons was, we're seeing what's going on just out there in the world these days. I mean, it's pretty obvious to, anyone to see and ears to hear knows that it's not, a wonderful state right now, the world. and we've seen this coming for quite some time. And so we really wanted to make sure that if our children wanted to work in a family business, that the opportunity was going to be there for them. It was a decision made only a few years ago. It wasn't sort of something that we'd identified very early on in our married life, but it's just gone that way. And to answer your question, yes, we employ 7 full-time, including myself. Only one of the employees is not a true Catholic that believes what we believe. So that's been really good because we've been able to bring in other people, and 3 of them are fresh converts to the faith, which is just fantastic. All 3 of them young men who have come from, one from Sydney, one from Brisbane, and one from Canberra. And that is a show in itself. But, we do have in the business as well. Some 2 others that are full time. Sometimes and out, getting, packing and getting jobs ready, or I should say, orders ready to be dispatched. Things like that, and just a general cleanup. It's a great environment. We say the Angelus 12:30 every day just before lunch, and any additional prayers. If we hear that someone needs prayers because they're in their death agony, we all kneel down and pray. We can do that when you have a Catholic family business, and I would certainly encourage anyone who's thinking about it to seriously look. There's no reward without taking a risk, and it's worthwhile. And if you're doing it for the right reasons, God will always look after you.
I think that's really fascinating, and I think that we've done something kind of similar where we bought a guest house here in Bavaria with my in-laws, and we run it together with them, and we bring over a girl from, we'll have a series of girls from America to come over, or maybe Australia, perhaps in the future, to come and help us to take care of our little daughter and a little bit around the house. And I think that's a really, as you say, it's a really great way to get out of the world a little bit and give a chance to have a good atmosphere where you work and give others that opportunity as well. I think that's awesome. And I think that's really interesting too. I think that's really old fashioned of you guys, because I just had a podcast last night that I haven't posted yet, where we talked about the Middle Ages and the times where people would whatever your father did, you did, and you usually moved into the next step or into the career that you followed from your father. And I think that part of the problem with our times is having too many choices. We can choose too many colleges and schools and jobs and girlfriends and all these different things. And I think maybe that's a bit of an issue. I think that's pretty neat that you're giving your kids that chance to just say, hey, here's something where you can feel safe and not have too many worries. That's great. That's true.
And look, I guess in today's, it's really driven heavily by the way the world is. I don't want my girls, out in the world trying to get a job with all all the challenges that we don't obviously probably need to go into, but also the boys as well. You can't wrap your kids up in cotton wool, and we've never done that. But if we can provide a safe haven for them, and those extra couple of years where they may be home, where we can still help to suit them up, get them ready for the world, then we'll take that opportunity. Because although our kids, we live a fairly what would you say? You wouldn't. We sort of, what's the word?
Well, they're homeschooled.
Yeah.
And they're not out in the world a great deal. Most of their friends are actual Catholic.
Yeah.
And they it's really just mixed with Catholics most of the time. So that's what they're used to. But we do have obviously some non-Catholic neighbor friends and things, but we're not actually close to them. No. So they don't interact unsupervised ever with a non-Catholic.
That's true. But the other thing about that is that, make no bones, that our children are very well aware of what goes on in the world today. So much so that, I would say that they're better informed than many adults. And I'm not saying that they're especially smart or anything like that. What I am saying is that we don't hide reality from them, and I think that's a big mistake. Just because they're children doesn't mean that they can't handle reality. Of course, you have to meter that out as you see fit on a case-by-case basis. But in terms of the way the world is and the pitfalls and how Satan is running rampant, they're across all that. And as we explain to them, you don't need to go and experience the pitfalls of life to know what's good and what's bad for you. So they're well informed.
Such a good point. Yeah, and I think just before you get going, I think I want to comment on that, because I think that the world would say that you're sheltered, you're living under a rock, because my family was also homeschooled. We have a very similar background with my family and yours. That we had 10 kids, 6 boys, 4 girls. We were all homeschooled up until a certain point when the boys went to a Catholic boarding school with Bishop Pivarunas in Omaha, and of course you had that the world looking at it as being, wow, these guys are kind of some weirdos, and they only hang out with their own cult and all these different things that I'm sure you guys have heard as well. And then it sounds like also with your family that the kids get to be an age where they can choose their vocation and they don't mess around. I mean, my sisters, my brother became a Marine when I believe he was 20 years old. Another brother joined the seminary when he was 19. The other brother's an electrician at 19. My sisters both got married at 18 or 19, and 2 other nuns joined when they were 18. So, and it sounds like it's the same with your family. And I think that's so awesome that you see the world says we're the backwards ones, when it's I think there's proof is in the pudding, where you can say, hey, the kids were ready. They clearly were ready, and they chose their vocation as soon as they became adults. And I think that's awesome.
Well, I think we've got answers at our age now, having basically put the 10 kids through the system, if you want to call it that. We've had many of the naysayers and those that have, you don't want your kids to grow up to be social rejects and yada, yada, yada. And I'm thinking, you mean like your kids? Because their kids have got their heads stuck in an iPod or what do they call it, iPhone or whatever. They are actually, and it's not the kids' fault, but often they're just socially inept. And it's because of this electronic world that a lot of them live in. And again, I'm not saying my kids are better than anyone else's. That's not the point. The point is that we're trying to ground them in reality, and obviously, the absolute priority above everything else is the faith, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But what is interesting, Kevin, is that I'm a product of the state school system. Okay, so I went from literally grade 0 all the way through to grade 12, and grade 5 was probably the best 3 years of my life when I think back. But the interesting thing is that I went through school with basically the same kids all the way through for 12 years or whatever it was. Some years we even may have had the same teacher, in the classroom. So we're dealing with the same children, the same people, day in, day out for 12, 13 years. And I'm not saying it's the same for everyone, but I noticed today in a lot of children, they struggle to sort of communicate effectively. Whereas one thing that I do notice in a lot of homeschool children is they seem to be better adjusted, in fact, socially. They seem to understand responsibility a bit better, and they just seem to be able to communicate and not sort of, have any fear when they're doing it. Whereas I do see with a lot of children that are educated, particularly by the state, this inability to really communicate effectively.
And I think before we keep going, I do want to mention, I know you both would agree with me that we are not in any way experts. We're not, as you said, Damian, we're not judging anybody else's, how they're raising their kids. We're sure that most people listening to this are doing their best. But the idea is, of course, to give your experience. You've raised 10 kids. You can say, hey, this is how we did it. this is some things that worked for us, maybe some things that didn't, and so obviously maybe it goes without saying, but I don't want anyone to get their feelings hurt and thinking, wow, that's not what we did. We're not trying to put anyone down. This is just trying to say, hey, this is how we find the ideal. This is how we did it, and just keep that in mind as you listen to the show. And I guess I would ask you both then, because Damian, you said a couple, I think, really interesting things. That you said that your kids are more informed likely than most kids, which I've seen also with homeschoolers. Not all, but many. And they're also better communicators. And I guess my question to both of you would be, how does that happen? How do you cause an informed family atmosphere without upsetting the innocence, I suppose, of your children?
Well, that's one thing I wanted to clarify when Damian was talking about that. When he was saying they're aware of what's going on in the world, we don't tell them about the perverse sort of behaviors that are going on, like, awful things to do with breaking the 6th and 9th commandment, for example. He meant more just in response to just, the Freemasonic forces at play, for example, and things like that. Like, to be aware of the organized forces of naturalism and how they manifest and the struggles without knowing the gory details of the pretty disgusting, gross things people do. In that respect, we try to maintain their innocence without them being ignorant. So, for example, we're extremely strict with what they watch on television. Like, we don't have pipe television. They're allowed certain DVDs, which I don't think a single one doesn't have some part they have to skip. And they don't listen to the radio or modern music, anything like that. So they're very innocent. And so that way, when they get of age and you have to start preparing them for marriage, for example, you present the virtue in the positive form and, just subtly explain what cannot be done without them knowing all the abominations that are going on out there. They're oblivious to a lot of that, most of it, almost all of it. So it works because by the time they go out into the world, they're much more mature. You can deal with hearing these awful things in your 20s, whereas it's something you really don't want to hear about when you're 12. So that's what we say when they're informed without being scandalized. So because we're very strict about avoiding those sort of scandalous things to be exposed to them, if that makes sense.
And we do that because, in terms of the innocence, let's face it, Satan absolutely loves to kill the innocence in children. And so what we have aimed to do pretty much from the start is to help them to maintain that innocence, as Theresa has said, and meter out certain things that they need to know when they need to know it. Because Satan will, we know how he operates. He will use images, he will use sound, whatever he can to recall in your memory horrible things you may have seen or heard. And so the fewer of the number of those things that you have seen or heard that he can use against you as ammunition, then that's a good thing. So where people might say, oh, you're wrapping them up in cotton wool, no, sunshine, we're not wrapping them up in cotton wool. We are preserving their innocence so that our enemy has less to work with.
That's so well said. And I think that it's so easy these days. If you get on, a good example with YouTube, for example, is that I have a podcast channel. It's called the Catholic Family Podcast. I think the only things I've ever put into the search bar is maybe Palestrina or church music or something of the sort. I've never searched anything remotely saying I'm a man or how old I am, etc. And on this YouTube channel, I get unbelievably immodest YouTube ads in videos that pop up on my front screen. So they don't know who I am. They don't know I'm a man. Unfortunately, they or I guess they probably do. But I mean, what are children seeing? Literally just going on YouTube to watch a children's video. I mean, who knows? I mean, it blows my mind every time I see it. And you guys, or Theresa did a really good series on True Restoration, which I can't recommend enough, about the evils of Disney. And that's really, really shaped a lot of, or helped us to, kick that out of our lives and to study into it ourselves. And I actually want to do a podcast myself on it, because I think that's an incredibly important topic, because there are some things that we see that are really obviously evil, as you say, Damian, that it's like, okay, we know, okay, the kids shouldn't be watching this, this, and this. But then instead, we're going to make sure that they watch cartoons because, well, cartoons are for children, right? And no, that's obviously not the case, as this show would say, which maybe I'll try to attach to the show notes. They very much have infiltrated these Disney shows, these cartoons, to it seems seemingly to corrupt the children.
Yes, and I should mention for anyone who's interested in listening to those shows, it's actually not just Disney. Disney happened to have been like the most obvious, but we discovered it was an eye-opener because we had pretty much given up children. We just don't let the children watch most of these things, and given up television a long time ago. So when we had to research for that, it was an eye-opener how shocking all the different productions were. So it was not just Disney, it was DreamWorks, like you name it. It was almost impossible to find anything mainstream that didn't have some pretty serious problem. And it was actually after researching that I realized the whole industry is so corrupt, just from the top to the bottom. And I just thought, no, I don't think God wants the children of the light to be dining on this filth and corruption that's being produced by the workers of darkness. So I'm very anti television and movies as a rule, but I don't strictly say they can never watch anything, but it's very strictly limited and very carefully policed. So yeah, it's incredible how many evil things are targeted at the youth. It really is incredible, and we have to be very vigilant to protect them from these. And it's actually not hard if you actually do homeschool and you're aware of the pitfalls. It's not that hard to just cut them out of your life. There's plenty of other things that can be doing.
And I think real quickly, Damian, sorry, I think someone in the world would say, if that's the case, how do you fill the time? I think people really don't know anymore. I think I'm 32 and I grew up without a cell phone, which shows you how quickly this has happened. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. And I remember back in the day, okay, my mom would say, go outside, and we'd go outside for hours and hours and hours. And I think these days parents, they don't even understand that. I don't think they even realize that that's even a possibility. They just think, oh my goodness, how am I going to distract my children? And I think that's a major, major problem.
Definitely. And of course, if you provide plenty of good books and basic materials, that it's not a matter of how they fill the time. We find it's that we don't have enough time to get everything done that we want to get done, if that makes sense. So they will get into other things. So, for example, since we were fortunate enough for a priest to be set up here, our boys serve mass, our daughters sing in the choir, Damian plays the organ, and just the practice, the time of practicing to be in the choir, for example, it's very time consuming, and they can also spend spare time looking into liturgical sacred music, and that's an interest, and that's a wholesome interest, and it's something good.
Yeah, but the other thing too is, I mean, the boys do boy stuff and the girls do girl stuff, and that's really important. I mean, our boys make up, weaponry. They do war videos.
They try to do woodwork.
Yeah, but like they do what they should be doing. The girls will do some sewing and some cooking and whatever else. I mean, it's like you can sort of go on, but I know exactly what you're saying. It's like, oh my goodness, what other options are there if they don't sit there in front of a computer or whatever? Well, there's plenty of options. It's not that difficult. You just have to, I don't know. We're talking though, mate. We're talking generation on generation, and we're sort of like third, fourth generation now since the whole debacle of Vatican II, which admittedly that's another show in itself, but of failure. I mean, you've got to call it out for what it is. We're now third and fourth generation down the road where there's just divorce is rife, the whole thing, and the total effects that's had on society is just an absolute killer. Not to mention the taking away or the breaking down or the sullying, if you like, of authority. You know, where the fathers used to be the authority figure, in most families now they're not. They're just some sort of a spineless dweeb who's there just to, you know, open his wallet every now and then and cop heck from his kids and his wife. That's how he's portrayed, certainly on the idiot box. It has been for many, many years. The clergy, you know, they're not well respected anymore. Police aren't well respected. Politicians, well, anyway, lawyers, another one. You know, like at the end of the day, those authority figures have been sort of just stripped of any respect, and so all these things sort of have a huge effect on what's happening in society, and particularly in the home.
Primary question is, how do you structure as a family? How do you literally keep your kids busy? Do you do it by saying, hey guys, go be busy, or here's an idea, or are you more structured? Do you say, okay, today we're going to do this, this, and this? Because I think homeschooling, which I obviously experienced as well, is pretty tough. And I think that you really have to be on it to keep your kids engaged. Was that difficult for you guys, or is that something you've been able to handle pretty well?
Well, I pretty much handle most of the homeschooling, which is pretty much most of their day while Damian works. So I'm very much into planning and programming and structure and getting the work done in a timely fashion. So I've got this ideal, but I'm not completely inflexible either. So I had several years before my eldest even started school, I had mapped out his entire primary school curriculum in my mind, and then wrote it all out. And so I type up timetables at the beginning of the year. I explain everything that's expected of them, and they basically get up, they do their morning prayers, they eat their breakfast, get ready. We do school prayers. We read from the Roman Martyrology, which I just have on like a PDF type of form. I don't actually own the book. For the day, we say, you know, pray for us to the saints. They go about their subjects. The younger ones are much more time-consuming on my behalf, but the older grades are very independent, and they just need to get it all done before they can pursue their personal interests. So it's get your work done, and then you're free to do your hobbies. And it's pretty simple. I teach them that because it's like, we got to do the work now before we get the reward in heaven. So it's the same principle. Work now for the reward later. You don't get the reward until you've done the work. So that's pretty much how we operate. But of course, we like the fact that homeschooling is flexible, because we will always defer school to be finished later if we have the opportunity to go to mass that day. So they get up, they might do an hour or something of school, then we'll go to mass, and then they'll come back and finish it. And then because the drive is about 45, 50 minutes to get to mass and then back again, we will do some, like they'll bring their reading books in the car, they'll bring some other books. We listen to a sermon or a Catholic podcast from Restoration, for example, or some of those seminary lecture series that most Holy Trinity Seminary have put out on the internet. So we use the time going there and back as educational as well. So by the time they get home, maybe about midday, they've done a little bit already, and then they can finish their schoolwork, and they're allowed to finish later since they've gone to mass. So you have that flexibility. And then if something does come up in the week, you can finish. I can say, okay, guys, we're busy on Wednesday, but don't worry, you finish school on Saturday. So we'll just shift it all up a day. So I'm not going to be holding them down like you must do this Monday to Friday, because you've got extra time to do. You can shift things around. So yeah, so we're flexible, but we're also inflexible as far as what needs to get done. But we're a bit more flexible about when exactly it does get done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I guess a question I've heard asked too about homeschooling is the issue with having the same authority figure all day long. And I think that's another modern idea of, well, you know, it's better if the teacher is the one reprimanding them, and then they can go home to mommy and mommy can give them a hug. Has that been an issue, or is that just a bunch of nonsense?
Personally, I think it's a bunch of nonsense, because when you just bring them up in a Catholic family. They don't have any real interaction with the modern world. They aren't infected with TV, music, the culture in general. They don't know anything different. And they're very happy about it. And it's natural because the parents are authority figures anyway. So they don't have an additional one with the teacher. But then, of course, we would say that the priest is another authority figure, of course. So it's not like we're the only authority figures they've got. But it's totally has worked fine. And we've never actually had any major rebellion problems, if that makes sense. I mean, kids are naughty and there's ongoing training, but outright rebellion or being negative about being homeschooled has never come up. They've all realized quite early that they're very grateful that they were homeschooled, and they would much prefer to be than not.
Well, just on that, Kevin, too, it's one thing I don't want to give people the impression, like your listeners are thinking, so, okay, yeah, pretty sterile sort of life, it's just all about religion all day long and that. Well, no, it's not. I mean, it is in this regard that, we do have a family motto, which is seek ye first the kingdom of God and his justice, and all these things shall be added unto you. That is, our life is centered around that. And so, because why is it centered around that? Well, because we have a job as parents. We don't own our children. God owns the children. We are custodians. We have a job to do, and our job is very simple, if you want to put it into a few words, and it is to get them to heaven, to save their souls. And so if there's going to be some obstacle to that, then it's got to go, because it's just not worth the risk. Does that mean that they live in this sterile environment where they don't go anywhere or do anything, or, well, that is absolutely not the case. And you can't really explain that sort of, on a show like this, unless you go into great detail, and it's very lengthy, which I don't think you need to do. But, it's interesting, as we've seen our children, the youngest is 8, the eldest is about 28. As they got into, the older ones are sort of getting into their teens and whatnot, we've noticed that they've become very entrepreneurial. Like our eldest son, Matthew, by the time he was 16, just off his own bat, he was put himself through like a graphics course and things like that, and became quite self-sufficient. And that's really important to us, because the key thing for us as parents, as I said, we don't own them. God owns them. God wants them back. When he was on the crucifix with his arms wide, spread out wide, it's like, when you say to a little child, "Oh, how much do you love Mummy?" They put their arms all the way out as far as they can stretch them. And that's what our Lord was doing. And he said, I want them back. I thirst for souls. I want them back. And that's the most important job that we as parents have. That is our key task. And so that's what our whole life is centered around. And I can't sort of make it any more clearer than that if there are obstacles to that, achieving that objective, then those obstacles need to be dealt with, promptly, and as best as we possibly can.
And that philosophy of simply saying God first, was that something that you started out with before you had children, or was that something that kind of grew as you had kids and it kind of became your motto?
From my perspective, it was my motto when I got married, or around at that time. I had already decided, before Matthew was born, our eldest son was born, I had already was very, very strong in the convictions as how I wanted to raise our children, and I just wanted to get it right. So I thought, I want to get one thing right, and I want to get this right. And of course, Damian agreed. So it's just something we would say to remind ourselves when there would be decisions to be made or things would come up. It's like, what's the principle behind this? How are we going to make a decision? And we always found that principle can get you through. So it's like everything. So we just thought, we'll just aim for that first, and then you end up being forced because of circumstances to kind of ruthlessly prioritize your life is how I've worded it, because there's only so much time. There's health issues to deal with. There's finances to deal with. There's all sorts of constraints in this world. So if you have a guiding principle, you can then know how to prioritize everything in accordance with that. So it was God first, religion first, and everything else will just have to work itself out. And it always has. And I'm not going to say we haven't had challenges, because we're married and everyone in this life has challenges. So, but we can say that they were always surmountable, and they were never problems. They were just challenges. So it definitely is, it's in the gospel, and we can trust in divine authority that it's true. And we can attest that it is true in our lives. And it's great because most of this school is permeated with the faith. And I think that it's impossible to have the faith, to go overboard with religion in your faith, so to speak. I'm not saying that you weren't on your knees praying all day, but everything you do in the day has to be directed towards the greatest honor and glory of God and the salvation of souls. That's what it's all about. And that's it. That's what it's all about. And anything else is false. So,
well, and I think it's a beautiful thing too when you say that the Catholic faith and the history of the Catholic faith and the saints and all of the stories, and it's more interesting than anything you're going to watch on TV, for goodness sake. I mean, the stories of the saints and the lives of the saints and the history that we can pull from and the spirit of it all. And my mom always talks about on the podcast I've done with her about that you can do different meals on different feast days, and you can wear different clothes. And the church was all about having feasts and fests. You're literally partying in respectful way, obviously, but they understood, the church in its glory and majesty and wisdom understood that people need joy, they need happiness in their life. And I think that people see that very differently. People outside the Catholic faith especially see it as being this drudgery and this black darkness, and it's absolutely not, for goodness sake. I mean, look at the feast that we can celebrate, St. Patrick's Day. And obviously that doesn't mean going to Dublin and getting wasted drunk, but the different things that you can do, the meals you can prepare, the prayers you can say, the songs you can sing, it's absolutely brilliant. And I think that people miss that.
The life, the Catholic family life. I mean, if it's done, I don't know, every family's different. It has its different dynamics, different personalities throughout, and all that sort of business. But in terms of maintaining the Catholic faith, I know that with us, for instance, I can only tell you what we do, and that is that pretty much every weekend there is a party of some description or a celebration of some description, whether it's to do with a particular holy day or a feast day or someone's birthday or a number of those on the same day. There's really not a weekend that goes by where we don't have people over, and we have a celebration of sorts, which includes, great food, singing around the piano, get the guitars out, telling stories, telling jokes, having a lot of fun, seriously. And so I don't want the listeners to think that it is this completely sterile sort of, religious, like we're running an order. This is not an order. This is not a Benedictine monastery. Trust me, it's not like that. We have lots of fun, and that's important too. But, I think our fun...
it's always directed towards the glory of God. That's the thing. It's always wholesome, and we like to talk about Catholic things.
Absolutely. The amount of conversation, the in-depth conversation about Catholic things, it's just, we always get into it. It just goes that way. And it's really great too when we have converts that come along that, they're new to the faith. They've accepted the gift that the Holy Ghost has given them. They've corresponded with those graces, but they're still green and they're learning a lot. And often they will say that they learn more from the conversations that we all have than the books that they read. And of course, we're not theologians or spiritual writers or anything like that, but certainly we can draw on our experiences and say, look, here's a great story, or here's a great saint, that sort of thing. And it just makes for a fantastic time. And you use the word joy, and that's exactly what it is.
Yes, and I've always... Sorry.
No, go ahead, Theresa, please.
No, I often say to the children, ours is a religion of joy. It is something so great and so wonderful that you have this deep joy, but that doesn't actually exclude that there is often sorrow in life. But underneath all that is that profound joy of being a child of God, participating in divinity. What is there not to be joyful about? And I think you cannot help but have this deep joy knowing that. And even the sorrows and the trials in life that layer on top of it are always just layered on top of that, if you understand what I'm saying. And it's, this is a happy household. The children are walking around, and often they're singing and they're laughing and they're doing, they're very happy. So it works.
But just to reiterate too, Kevin, I mean, I guess we're talking about what we do, and to reiterate what you said earlier, we're certainly not saying that ours is the model family, or that, I mean, these are purely opinions. These are purely examples of what we do. Doesn't mean that, what we do is going to work for everyone, even in a Catholic sense, because, as I said earlier, there are different dynamics within every family, different personalities, and so on and so forth. So you have to roll with it as best you can with the resources that you have. But we should all, as Catholics, have that one thing in common, and that is that inner peace in the knowledge that, if God calls us today, that, we at least have some degree of confidence that we're going to be saved, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It just doesn't get any clearer than that.
Well, and I think my parents had said too that they raised us with the idea of making all of the most enjoyable things we did were based around the faith. Again, like you mentioned before, parties, and we'd go to the church, and all of our friends were from the church, and so when we went there, it was enjoyable. And so when it became time for us to accept the faith as our own and not as our parents, we had good memories, good feelings about it. It wasn't just this, my parents forced me to go to church and kneel all for 2 hours, which I think unfortunately sometimes is the case. And I think people sometimes maybe mix that up, where they think, okay, less is easier, and it's not the case. More is easier when you give them the joys and the fun as part of the Catholic faith. If it's writing story, whatever it is, especially if you're homeschool, you can create an entire curriculum based around the Catholic faith, which is brilliant. And whatever it is, I think it's a beautiful thing, and it's a good way to segue into part two and to end this part one, because in part two we want to talk a little bit more about how you guys are coping in a pretty dystopian, tyrannical Australia right now, and maybe we can talk a little bit about how you keep that joy and how you can survive a crazy, chaotic, pathetic world because of our Catholic faith. And I don't know if you either of you have the last words for this part one, where we talked more about child rearing. In the next part, we'll talk a little bit more about, having a family, being a Catholic family in this modern world. Any last words?
You can go first.
I just wanted to comment on something you said to do with, you mentioned about like Catholic history history and something. What I noticed as well is we read a lot to the children, they read a lot, and I'm surprised at how much history I've learned through reading biographies of saints, because they normally tell you a lot about the place and the time that the saint lived in. And just by simply having the children read a lot of the lives of the saints, they actually do learn a lot about Catholic history just through that. And then also in the evenings, my husband, Damian, he has a selection of Catholic books, and that's his time with the children after we've had dinner and said the rosary and the homeschooling is behind us. He will read from one of those, the adult books, but the children understand. So he might read from the Catechism Explained or the Golden Legend, or I don't know what other books you have at the moment. But yeah, that's really good as well, because he'll have a short period of just talking. It's part of their education, and it's just in addition to all the catechism they do throughout the day with me. And I think it's important that the fathers, presuming we're talking about people who have Catholic, both parents, so are Catholic, not mixed marriages. I think it's important that the fathers show piety to the children. It's not just coming from the mothers, and that the fathers do have some part of the religious education, even if it's just a little bit. Just make the time to spend that little bit of time so the children all know this is not a mum thing. This is a daddy thing. This is a person thing. This is what people should be doing. And it's manly, and there's nothing not manly about being devout and pious. So I'll finish with, you can finish off with any comments.
Look, I would just say, I guess to the fathers out there, your role is the most important role in society, because, people say that society is built, the building block of society is the family. Well, it's not. The building block of society is a good Catholic family. That's, if we wanted to talk about how the restoration could potentially come about, it's got to start with the family. It's got to start in our own backyards. And, we as husbands and fathers, we need to understand our responsibilities with clarity. We need to ponder, again, this is all my opinion, but I think we need to ponder often on, put ourselves before God at our particular judgment. And he's going to say, I gave you X amount of souls. What did you do with them? That is the one thing that kind of gets to me, to think, I do not want to be trying to come up with excuses. Do you know what I mean? So we've got a job to do. And as husbands and fathers, we've got to be strong. We've got to be firm. And, we've got to be approachable, all those wonderful leadership characteristics, because we are producing leaders. They are followers of Christ, but they're soldiers of Christ, and we need leaders. We don't need followers of society, because if you go down that road, they will apostatize, because this is not a time. This is not a time for the faint-hearted. It's literally, if you're not hardcore Catholic now, you're going to have challenges. That's a fact of life. So I just encourage all those husbands and fathers out there to, to certainly understand that responsibility. And I think just to reiterate what Theresa said, that example is so important, especially for a husband and a father. The boys in particular need to see you on your knees. They need to see you doing that. They need to see you doing that outside of the family rosary, because they need to see that it is so very important, and you can't expect from them what you're not prepared to do yourself. And it's an extremely manly thing to get on your knees, acknowledge your God, and for your boys to see you praying, and that will help them to be strong as well.
Perfect. Thank you both for that. We can obviously continue the conversation, and I'm sure we'll still talk a bit about child raising and whatnot in part 2, but we'll end part 1 there. I think it's a good place to end, and we'll be back shortly for part 2. So Damian, Theresa, thanks for joining, and we'll be back for part 2 here shortly.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.